Get comfortable, settle the pillow, let your shoulders drop, and let the room around you go soft at the edges, because tonight we are going into the largest and most famous house in Britain, and almost nothing you have pictured about it is going to survive the first hour. When people imagine Buckingham Palace in the reign of Queen Victoria, they tend to imagine a single image: chandeliers, gold plate laid out on white linen, a staircase of marble under a painted ceiling, and somewhere at the top of it, a small woman in black, moving slowly through rooms designed to make everyone else feel small. It is a beautiful picture. It appears on biscuit tins. It is not exactly wrong, but it is a picture of about 4 rooms out of several hundred, taken at 1 hour out of 24, from the only angle that was ever meant to be seen. Here is the version that does not appear on the biscuit tin. The palace in the middle of the 19th century was cold. It was damp in a way that got into linen and into plaster and into people. Its chimneys smoked so badly that fires in the staterooms sometimes had to be put out because the smoke came back down into the room instead of going up. Its drains were a subject of official reports and quiet horror. Its kitchens were so far from its dining rooms that hot food arriving hot was treated as a small daily victory rather than an expectation. And its household, the enormous machine of people who kept the whole thing standing, was organized so badly, so illogically, split between rival departments that barely spoke to one another, that a single fireplace in a single room could require the cooperation of 3 separate authorities before it produced any heat at all. That is the paradox we are going to sit inside tonight. The grandest house in the kingdom was also one of the worst-run households in London, and the people who made it look otherwise every single day, from before dawn until well after dark, were never once meant to be seen doing it. If you enjoy these long journeys into ordinary lives, do subscribe. It genuinely helps this small channel keep going. And if you are still awake at the end, tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from and what the clock says where you are. I like knowing how far these voices travel. Now, let the room go quiet. Let the year fall away from you. It is the spring of 1861. The place is London, and the house is the palace at the western end of the park, and it does not look the way it looks today. The long front you would recognize, the one that faces the wide road and the memorial, has not been built yet. What stands there instead is the east wing put up under the previous decade, plain and rather disliked, faced in a soft stone that London's coal smoke is already eating into. Behind it, the older courts and wings sprawl in a great hollow square, and behind those, out of sight of anyone arriving in a carriage, lies a second building entirely. Offices, stores, cellars, kitchens with ceilings high enough to swallow the noise of 30 people working, stone passages that run for what feels like a quarter of a mile under the level of the ground. That second building is where you live. You are 24 years old. You are a housemaid in the palace establishment, and you have been here 3 years, which makes you neither new nor senior. You came with a written character from a rectory household in the country, and a cousin already in service here who spoke a word in the right ear, because nobody walks into this place off the street. Your wages are paid quarterly. You earn something in the region of £18 in the year, with your board, your beer money, and an allowance of tea and sugar, and the reasonable expectation of cast-off clothing from above stairs, which is worth more than it sounds. Out of that £18, you buy your own print dresses, your own boots, your own aprons and caps. Boots go quickly on stone floors. You share an attic room, under the roof with another housemaid. There is a window the size of a tea tray. There is no fireplace in it, and if there were one, nobody would light it. The court is in residence. That single fact organizes everything about the day ahead of you. The queen is at home, and the prince is at home, and their children are at home, and so the house is not a house that is merely being kept warm and dusted against a future return. It is live. It is working. There will be a household dinner tonight, and there may be visitors this afternoon, and every room the family might conceivably walk through must be, at the hour they walk through it, in a condition of perfect and effortless order. That word is the one to hold on to. Effortless. The whole architecture of your working life rests on a single fiction, and it is worth naming the fiction plainly before the day starts, because everything that follows is in service of it. The fiction is that a great house runs itself, that the fires are simply lit, that the grates are simply clean, that the carpets are simply not dusty, and the lamps are simply not smoking, and the water in the ewer upstairs is simply warm at the hour it is wanted. Not that someone has done these things, that they are, in some passive and permanent way, done. Maintaining that fiction requires an extraordinary quantity of labor, performed at hours and along routes specifically designed so that nobody with a title ever collides with it. There are back stairs so that you do not use the front ones. There are service corridors running behind the staterooms so that you do not cross them. There are rules, unwritten but absolutely understood, about what you do with your body and your face if the fiction is about to be broken. If you hear a door and footsteps and realize that someone is coming who is not supposed to see you at work. We will get to those rules. They are stranger and more precise than you might expect. But there is one more thing to understand about this particular house before we go down the stairs, because it is the thing that makes the palace different from any other great household in England, and it is the thing that made intelligent, competent people despair of it for decades. The palace was not run by one authority. It was run by three, and arguably four, and they had almost nothing to do with one another. There was the Lord Steward's department, which had charge of, broadly, the below-stairs world, the kitchens, the cellars, the provisions, the coal. There was the Lord Chamberlain's department, which had charge of the above-stairs world, the staterooms, the furnishings, the ceremonial, the visitors. There was the master of the horse, with the stables and the carriages and everything on four legs, and running through all of it, tangled up in questions of who paid for what, was the Office of Works, which was responsible for the fabric of the building itself. Each of these was headed by a great officer of state, an aristocrat, a political appointment who might change when the government changed, and who in many cases did not live in the building at all and had no daily involvement in what happened inside it. Beneath each of them was a separate chain of authority, separate accounts, separate staff, separate ideas about who was allowed to do what. The most famous illustration of what this produced concerns a fire. The story was repeated so often, and by people close enough to the household to know, that it has become the standing shorthand for the whole problem. The laying of a fire in a room, the raking out and the black-leading, and the arrangement of coal and kindling belonged to one department. The lighting of it belonged to another. So a fire could sit, perfectly laid, entirely ready, in a cold room, waiting for a person from a different chain of command to arrive and put a match to it. And if that person's work was elsewhere, the fire waited, and so did whoever was sitting in the room. Windows were the same. The inside of a pane of glass was cleaned by the household. The outside of the same pane belonged to the Office of Works. It was quite possible for a window in the palace to be half clean for months at a stretch, spotless within, filthy without, because the two halves of a single sheet of glass sat in two different budgets. None of this was anybody's fault exactly. It was the accumulated residue of centuries of court organization, offices created for reasons that had made sense under earlier monarchs and had simply never been abolished, layered one on top of the other until the whole structure was less a system than a sediment. The prince consort, who had a German administrator's temperament and a deep dislike of waste, spent years trying to force it into some rational shape. He achieved a good deal. He did not achieve everything. And down at your level, where the sediment actually touches the floor, what it means in practice is that a very large number of things in this building are somebody's job, and a smaller number of things are nobody's, and the difference between those two categories is not always obvious until something goes wrong. So, that is the house. Enormous, magnificent, cold, damp, smoky, divided against itself, and about to require you to make it look like a place where none of that is true. Downstairs, the great clock has not yet struck 5. In a minute, you are going to open your eyes in the dark under the roof, and put your feet on bare boards, and reach for a dress you laid out last night, precisely so that you could find it without a light. The house is enormous and silent and full of sleeping people, and you are one of the first in it to move. The dark under the roof is not the same dark as the dark in a bedroom at home. At home, there is always some leak of light, a street lamp, a fire not quite out, the grey of a window where the curtain does not meet. Up here, on the top floor of the north wing, the window is small and set high and faces a courtyard that has nothing in it to be lit. The dark is total, and it is cold, and you know the shape of the room entirely by memory. You are awake before the clock. Most mornings you are. 3 years of 5 o'clock rising builds something in the body that no bell can improve upon, a kind of internal alarm that goes off 10 minutes early and lies there, unwilling to waste the 10 minutes and unable to use them. Beside you, in the second bed, the other housemaid is still asleep, breathing slowly. You share this room, and you have shared it since your first week. The room is perhaps 9 feet by 11. It contains 2 iron bedsteads, 1 washstand, 2 boxes, and a row of pegs. There is no fireplace. There has never been a fireplace. In the whole of the attic story, in a building whose lower rooms consume coal by the ton, the servants sleep in rooms that were designed with no provision for heat at all. You sit up, and the cold takes the front of your chest, and you do the thing you have taught yourself to do, which is to move quickly and not think about it. Dressing in the dark is a skill. You learned it the way you learned everything else here, by doing it badly and then less badly. Last night you laid the print dress across the foot of the bed, with the sleeves folded inward, so that your hand finds the collar first and the rest follows. Stockings from the top of the box, stays, which fasten in front, which is the only reason a woman who dresses alone can dress at all. Then the dress itself, and then the apron, which ties behind, which you do by feel, with your arms bent back at an angle that would look absurd if there were light enough to see it. The water in the jug on the washstand has a skin of cold on it that is not quite ice, but is thinking about it. You wash your face and hands and the back of your neck, and the shock of it does more than the 10 minutes of lying awake did. There is a smell in this room in the mornings that you no longer really notice, but it is there. Tallow from the candle end, coal dust that comes up the back stairs and settles everywhere in this house without exception, the damp of plaster that never entirely dries, and under all of it the faint mineral flatness of a great deal of stone. Then the hair, pinned up tight and entirely covered, because hair that shows is hair that can be commented upon, and being commented upon is the thing you have spent 3 years learning to avoid. The print dress is the morning dress. It is cotton, striped or small patterned, washable, and it exists because the work you are about to do involves ash, blacklead, soot, and water. You will wear it until roughly 3 in the afternoon. Then you will wash and change entirely into a black dress with a white cap and a white apron, and you will wear that until you go to bed. It is worth slowing down for, that change of dress, because it looks at first like nothing more than practicality, and it is not. Consider what the black afternoon dress actually announces. It says that the dirty work of the house is finished. It says that the person wearing it is now fit to be encountered, that if she is seen crossing a corridor at 4 o'clock, she will not embarrass anybody. In a great house, the morning belongs to labor, and the afternoon belongs to appearance, and the two are marked on the bodies of the women doing the work, so that a glance is enough to tell you what hour of the household's day it is. A housemaid in print at 4 in the afternoon is a house running late. A housemaid in black at 7 in the morning is a housemaid who has not done her grates. And there is a second thing in it, which is that you pay for these clothes yourself. The uniform is not issued, it is expected. Out of your wages you buy print for the mornings and black stuff for the afternoons, and enough caps and aprons to allow for washing, and the cost of them is a real subtraction from a wage that is not large. Livery is provided for the men servants, coats and breeches and all the rest, at considerable expense to the establishment. The women buy their own. Nobody ever explains why. It is simply how it is done, in this house and in every house of any size in the kingdom, and the difference sits there in the accounts, year after year, unremarked. Here is what most people get wrong about a house like this one, and it is worth saying plainly before the day starts, because everything that follows depends on it. The fiction that this household runs on is that it does not require running. A room is warm when the family enters it. The fire is already burning and has been long enough to have stopped smoking. The grate is clean. The carpet has no ash on it. The shutters are open, the curtains drawn back, the water in the ewer fresh, the lamp trimmed, the candles replaced, the letters on the salver. None of these things is ever seen to happen. They have simply happened in the way that morning has simply happened, and the person who enters the room is not required to think about the mechanism any more than she is required to think about the sunrise. Producing that effect in a building of this size takes hundreds of people and a great deal of coal and an organizational effort that in any other context would be described as an industry. The magnificence is real, the gold is real, the marble is real, the pictures are real. But the impression of effortlessness, which is the thing the whole building is designed to produce, is manufactured every single day, by hand, in the dark, by people who are specifically instructed to be elsewhere when it can be observed. That is your job. Not cleaning exactly, the removal of evidence. There is a further complication, and it is one that people who have never lived inside a court establishment find genuinely hard to believe, because it sounds like something invented for a comic paper. The palace household is not one household, it is several, running in parallel, under separate officers, with separate staffs and separate budgets, each of which regards the others with the affection of neighbouring parishes disputing a boundary. The Lord Chamberlain's department has its territory. The Lord Steward's department has its own. The Master of the Horse has another, the Office of Woods and Forests, which is not a household department at all, but a government body responsible for the fabric of public buildings, has authority over a good deal of the structure itself. And because the boundaries between these departments were drawn generations ago, for reasons that made sense to somebody then, they now fall in places that make no sense to anybody. The most famous example, repeated so often in the 1840s that it became a kind of standing joke among people who had cause to know, concerns the fires. The laying of a fire, the carrying and setting of coal and wood in a grate, belonged to one department. The lighting of that fire belonged to another. Two separate offices, two separate chains of command, two separate sets of servants, one grate. If the first party had been through and the second had not, the room contained a perfectly prepared fire and no flame in it, and there was, strictly speaking, nobody in the building whose duty it was to solve the problem, because solving it would have meant one department doing another department's work, which was precisely the thing the whole structure existed to prevent. You have never once seen anyone stand in a cold room and refuse on principle to strike a match. In practice, the people who actually do the work sort it out among themselves, quietly, by arrangement, in the way that people always sort things out beneath the level at which the rules are written. But the arrangements are informal, and informal arrangements depend on goodwill, and goodwill is not evenly distributed. When something goes wrong here, it very seldom goes wrong because someone was lazy. It goes wrong because two people each correctly believed the thing was not theirs. Now, candle in hand, door pulled to softly, so as not to wake the whole corridor, and out. The passage outside runs the length of the attic story, low, narrow, uncarpeted, with doors down both sides. Other doors are opening now. There is very little talk at this hour, a murmur here and there, a cough, the sound of a jug being set down. Everyone is going the same way, and nobody is in a hurry to speak. The back stairs are stone, worn in the middle of each tread into a shallow dish by generations of feet, and they turn tightly on themselves so that you come down through the building in a spiral, floor after floor, with the candle throwing your own shadow up the wall in front of you. These stairs are not decorated. Nothing back here is decorated. The walls are painted a flat color that was probably chosen because it does not show marks, and there is a smell of stone and cold air, and, faintly, of the kitchens, which are already awake and have been for some time. This is the other palace. Behind the staterooms and beneath them, and threaded all through them, runs a second building of passages, service stairs, storerooms, sculleries, still rooms, larders, lamp rooms, and corridors that go for what feels like a quarter of a mile without a single window. The family will live their entire lives in this house without walking through most of it. That is not an accident of design. It is the design. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opens out, and there is light down here. Real light. Lamps already lit, and the day has started properly. And you turn left, toward the housemaid's closet, where the boxes and brushes are kept, and reach for the first of them. The housemaid's box is a wooden tray with a handle across the middle, and it holds everything the first 3 hours of the day require. Brushes of 4 different stiffnesses, a pot of blacklead paste, a stiff cloth for applying it, and a soft one for polishing it off. emery paper for the steel parts, a pan and a short-handled shovel for the ash, rags, a supply of clean paper and kindling split thin as a finger, and a tinderbox, though by this year most of the household have matches. The whole thing, filled, is heavy enough that you carry it on your hip rather than in front of you, and after 3 years your right arm is noticeably stronger than your left. There is an order to the rooms, and you do not deviate from it. The order exists because of when people wake, and people wake according to rank, and so the order is really a map of the household's importance, drawn in the sequence of lit fires. The rooms that will be occupied earliest are done first. The rooms that will not be entered until the middle of the morning can wait. A room nobody will use today may be given a fire anyway, because an unheated room in this building goes damp within days, and damp is the enemy that never stops working. You kneel, that is the first thing, and it is the position you will be in for most of the next 3 hours, and it is why a housemaid's knees are the first part of her to give out. Cloth spread on the hearthstone first, to catch what falls, then the grate. Yesterday's fire has left a bed of ash, some of it still faintly warm at the center if the room was used late, and it lifts in a fine grey cloud at the smallest disturbance. This is the part of the work that requires patience rather than strength. You rake the ash forward gently, sift the cinders out of it, because cinders will burn again, and nothing in a well-run house is wasted, and lift the ash into the pan in slow scoops, and the dust goes onto your hands and up your sleeves and into your hair, and there is nothing to be done about that except to change your dress at 3 o'clock and try not to touch your face before then. Then the bars and the fire back, cleaned, then the black lead. It comes as a paste, and it goes on with the stiff cloth, worked into the ironwork until every surface is covered, and then it is brushed and brushed and brushed with the polishing cloth until the whole grate comes up to a soft, deep, near metallic black that catches the light. The steel fender and fire irons get emery paper and elbow work until they shine. A well-done grate is genuinely beautiful, and it will be beautiful for about 40 minutes, until it is lit, and then it will be covered in ash again, and tomorrow morning you will do the same thing. Then the laying. Paper twisted into loose knots at the bottom, because paper packed tight will not draw. Kindling arranged over it in a lattice, not a heap. Cinders from yesterday next, then coal on top, the pieces chosen by size and set rather than tipped, so that air can move through the whole structure. A badly laid fire will either go out or smoke, and a smoking fire in an occupied room is a failure that will be noticed and reported and traced back to you by name. And then, in a great many of these rooms, you do not light it. You lay it and you leave it, and somebody else will come with a taper. This is one of the celebrated absurdities of the palace, and it is worth slowing down for, because it explains a great deal about how this house actually functioned. The palace was governed by 3 separate departments, each with its own head, its own staff, its own budget, and its own jealous sense of jurisdiction. The Lord Chamberlain's department was responsible for the fabric and furnishing of the rooms, which included, by long custom, the laying of fires. The Lord Steward's department was responsible for provisioning, which included the fuel itself, and therefore, by the same logic, the lighting of what had been laid. The master of the horse governed everything outside the doors. None of the 3 reported to the others. All 3 reported, in theory, to the Queen, and in practice, to nobody very much. The result was that a fire could sit laid and unlit for hours, while the 2 departments failed to coordinate, and a window with a broken pane might require the glass to be ordered by one office and the frame to be repaired by another, and a room could be swept by a servant who was forbidden to clean the windows in it because windows belonged elsewhere. The story most often repeated is the one about the fire, and it has been repeated so often that it has been polished into something like a joke. It was not a joke to the people who lived with it. It was a system in which nobody could be held responsible for anything, because responsibility had been divided so finely that it had evaporated. By the time you came into service, some of this had been mended. The Prince Consort had spent the 1840s methodically fighting the household departments to get the ordinary business of the building placed under a single officer, and he had partly won. But an institution of this age does not surrender its habits, and there are still corridors where you know exactly which door you may go through and which you may not, and why, and the why is nothing to do with the building. The palace burned coal on a scale that is difficult to hold in the mind until you translate it into the things you can see. In a hard winter, with the court in residence, the household consumed coal by the hundreds of tons in a season, and in a full year, the figure ran to something over 1,000 tons. It arrived by barge and by cart. It was tipped into cellars beneath the building, and from those cellars, every single scuttle of it was carried upward by a person. That is the fact the ledgers do not put plainly, and the fact that matters most. There is no lift for coal. There are stairs. A full scuttle weighs somewhere between 30 and 40 pounds, and a room in constant use will take several scuttles a day, and the rooms are on the first floor and the second, and the cellars are below the ground. The coal porters and the odd men who do this work walk a distance every day that would be respectable for a professional pedestrian, and they walk it loaded, and they walk it up. You do not carry the heaviest of it. There is a division of labor, and yours is the great and the laying and the fine work. But you carry enough, and you know the particular ache that comes from lifting a scuttle to the height of a fender several dozen times before breakfast. And then, having burned it, the house complains about it. The chimneys here are famously bad. In the staterooms especially, the flues were built long and turned awkwardly, and the great rooms are so large and so tall that they draw badly, and in certain winds particular fireplaces will simply refuse to send their smoke upward and will send it sideways into the room instead. There are apartments in this building where the choice on a bad day is between being cold and being smoked, and where the family have been known to sit in coats. Sweeps come, engineers come, reports are written recommending alterations. The alterations are expensive, and the departments argue about which of them ought to pay, and the arguing takes years, and in the meantime, the chimneys go on doing what they have always done. So the grandest house in England is, in the practical sense that matters at 6 in the morning, a difficult house to heat, and you are the person whose competence stands between that difficulty and anybody upstairs ever having to think about it. The other rule of these hours is the one that has nothing to do with fires. You are not to be seen. It is not written anywhere in the form of a sentence, but it is absolute, and it is taught to you within your first week, and by 3 years in it has become something closer to instinct than obedience. The work of the morning must be finished before the household is up, because the work must appear to have not been done. A swept room, a laid fire, a polished grate, all of it must present itself as the natural condition of the room, rather than as the result of a woman on her knees with black paste on her hands. And so you listen while you work. You learn the building's sounds the way you learn a language. You can tell a footman's tread from a page's, and either from the particular, unhurried step of somebody who has never once had to hurry in this house. And when you hear that step in a corridor while you are in it, you do not greet, and you do not curtsy in the middle of a passage and make a small performance of yourself. You step back. There is an alcove, or a doorway, or a window recess, and you go into it, and you turn your face toward the wall, and you make yourself as close to furniture as a living person can manage, and you wait, and the step passes, and you come out and go on. Nothing is said on either side. That is the whole of the arrangement. Grey is coming into the windows now, the flat, colourless light of a London morning in the cold half of the year, and you can begin to see the room you have been working in by something other than your own candle. The ashpan is heavy. Your hands are black to the wrist, and there is a grey line under each fingernail that will not come out until Sunday. Somewhere below you a door has opened and shut, and somewhere above you a bell has been pulled, and along the passage there is the sound of someone else's brush against someone else's grate. You gather the cloth by its corners, so the fallen ash goes up into a bundle, lift the box onto your hip, and go on to the next room. By 9 o'clock, the worst of the morning's dirty work is behind you, and you go down to eat. The servants' hall is in the basement, on the side of the house where the windows sit high in the wall and look out at the level of the gravel, so that what you see while you eat is a strip of grey sky and, occasionally, the boots of a man crossing the yard. It is a long room with a long table, scrubbed deal, and benches, and a clock, and a fireplace that gets less attention than any fireplace upstairs. There is a smell of bread and bacon fat and wet wool, because half the people in the room have been outside already. You do not sit where you like. Nobody in this room sits where they like. The table is arranged by rank as strictly as the drawing room upstairs is arranged by title, and the arrangement is understood so completely that no one ever has to explain it. The upper servants come in first and sit at the head. Below them, in descending order, come the footmen and the under-butlers, the housemaids by seniority, the kitchen staff, the porters and odd men, and at the bottom of the table, nearest the door and the draught, the scullery maids and the youngest boys, who are perhaps 13 and who eat as though somebody might take the plate away. You are 3 years in service here, which places you a little above the middle of the housemaids and gives you a seat you have occupied for long enough that if you were absent from it, the gap would be noticed before you were. Grace is said. Then the meal begins, and it begins in near silence, because conversation at the lower end of the table, before the upper end has spoken, is not forbidden by any written rule, but does not happen. And then, part-way through, the upper servants get up and leave. This is the part that surprises people who imagine a great household eating together in some warm and democratic way. In a house of this kind, the senior staff take the first part of their meal in the servants' hall as a matter of form, and then withdraw to the steward's room to finish it in private, waited on themselves, with a cloth on the table and glasses and a very different standard of food. The house steward, the housekeeper, the chef, the Queen's own attendants, the senior pages, they eat their dinner apart, and in some households the joint is carried out of the hall and follows them, which is a piece of theatre nobody in the hall ever comments on aloud. Below stairs, the aristocracy is not abolished, it is copied. Here is something worth slowing down for, because the scale of the thing is difficult to hold in the mind. The royal household of this period is not a staff. It is a small institution, several hundred people strong, and its shape has less to do with the running of a house than with several centuries of accumulated office. There are the great officers at the top, the Lord Chamberlain, the Lord Steward, the Master of the Horse, men of rank who hold their positions politically and who in some cases are seldom in the building at all. Below them are the working heads of department. Below those are the clerks and the comptrollers and the paymasters. And below all of that, at last, are the several hundred people who actually carry, cook, sweep, mend, light, and clean. Some of those posts describe recognizable work. The chef and the kitchen brigade under him, 40 or 50 strong at full stretch, do exactly what you would expect. The laundry maids wash, the grooms and coachmen and helpers in the Royal Mews look after somewhere near 100 horses. The gardeners garden, and then there are the others. There is a yeoman of the gold and silver pantry, an office concerned entirely with plate, its custody, its counting, and its cleaning. There are table deckers, whose business is the laying and dressing of the table, an art considered too particular to leave to the footmen. There are men whose whole employment concerns lamps, their trimming, their filling, their wicks, their glass. There are pages of the back stairs, and pages of the presence, and pages of the chambers, distinctions which mean something exact to the men who hold them, and almost nothing to anybody else. There is, at various points in the century, a keeper of the swans, a rat catcher, and a chocolate maker to the Queen, and while some of these are ancient survivals kept alive by their salaries, they are on the books all the same, and somebody is drawing the money. The result is a house in which responsibility is divided into so many small freeholds that no single person can see the whole of it, and where a thing that falls between two offices may simply never be done at all. You have heard the stories, and so has everyone at this table, that the cleaning of the outside of a window belongs to one department and the inside of the same window to another, so that it is entirely possible for a pane of glass to be half clean for a month, that the laying of a fire belongs to one office and the lighting of it to a second, that a room may be swept by one department and its furniture dusted by a different one on different days according to different rotas answering to different men, neither of whom has the authority to tell the other to hurry. You may take those stories with as much salt as you like. What is certainly true is that the household was regarded, by the people who had to live in it, as badly organized on a scale nobody outside quite believed, and that the complaints came from high enough up that they eventually produced a reckoning. Now, money, because the numbers tell you more about this house than the gold plate does. You are a housemaid, and you are paid somewhere between 14 and 20 pounds a year, depending on your place in the order and how long you have held it. That figure sounds small, and in absolute terms it is, but almost none of your living comes out of it. Your bed is found, your food is found, and it is better food than most working people in London eat, meat twice a day and as much bread as you want. You are given beer money, or beer itself, an allowance measured in pints per day and taken entirely seriously as a right. Your print dresses you provide yourself, which is a real expense, but your caps and aprons and a good deal else arrive as cast-offs from above, and the trade in used clothing that flows downward through a household of this size is a considerable part of what a maid actually earns. So the £20 is nearly all savable, and that is the point of it. A woman who serves 5 or 6 years in a place like this and does not spend foolishly can leave with £60 or £80 behind her, which in the world outside is not a fortune, but is the difference between marrying into a household with furniture in it and marrying into a room. Then look up the table. A senior footman, a tall one, chosen partly for his height and his calves, and paid accordingly, might have 30 or 40 pounds, plus livery worth as much again, plus a share of the tips that visitors leave, which in a house that receives constantly is not a trivial sum. A page has more. The housekeeper is on something well beyond that, with her own sitting room and her own authority. And the chef, if he is French and celebrated, is on several £100 a year and is understood to be worth it, more than a country clergyman, more than most of the clerks who write out the household's accounts, a wage that would make a small landowner blink. Sit with that for a moment. In the same basement, eating from the same kitchen, are a girl of 13 scouring pans for £6 a year and a man drawing 500, and both of them are servants, and the gap between them is wider in proportion than the gap between the chef and half the gentlemen who dine upstairs. That gap is not merely a matter of pay. It is enforced hourly, in small ways, at this table. Watch who speaks first. Watch how people are addressed. The upper servants are given their office as a title. The house steward is spoken to as such. The housekeeper is Mrs. and her surname, whether she has ever married or not. The chef is Monsieur, regardless of what anyone thinks of him. The senior housemaids are called by their surnames alone, which is a mark of standing. You are called by your Christian name, and were called by a different Christian name entirely in a previous place, because a household that already has 2 women of your name will simply assign you another and expect you to answer to it. The youngest kitchen girls are frequently not addressed at all. They are looked at, and they move. None of this is cruelty. That is what makes it hard to describe to anyone who has not lived inside it. The senior people at the top of the table are not unkind, on the whole. They are conscious of their position in a system they did not build and expect to be treated according to it, exactly as the family upstairs do. Everybody here is somebody's inferior. Even the great officers of the household are subject to the Queen, and even the Queen, as she says herself often enough, is subject to duty. The clock strikes. Benches go back across the flags with a noise like furniture being dragged, and the room empties in reverse order, the lowest first, because they have the furthest to go and the most to do. You take your cup and plate to the end of the table where they are collected. Your hands are cleaner than they were an hour ago. Not clean. Upstairs, 3 floors above you, the shutters are being opened in rooms you will be in by 10:30, and the day's real work, the visible work, the work that must leave no trace of itself, is about to begin. 8:30, and upstairs the day has already been underway for 2 hours. The Queen rises early. This is one of the fixed facts of the establishment, as fixed as the hour the coal is delivered, and it shapes the working lives of several hundred people who will never speak to her. She is awake by 7 or thereabouts, often earlier in summer, and she likes the windows open. That last detail matters more than it sounds. A woman who prefers cold rooms sets the temperature of an entire house, and the household has learned to dress accordingly, and to expect complaints from visitors who have not. Breakfast is frequently taken privately, in a small room rather than a great one, and often with the prince and whichever of the children are at home. There is a walk in the garden before the serious business of the morning begins, weather permitting, and sometimes when it does not. Then the boxes. The dispatch boxes come in leather. They come constantly, and they are the actual substance of the day upstairs. Papers to be read, papers to be signed, papers to be argued over, with the prince at the two desks they use side by side. The image of a queen sitting idle among cushions belongs to painting and to pantomime. The reality is a small woman at a writing table for several hours with a pen in her hand and a husband beside her going through the same papers at a slightly faster rate and with slightly more system. You know none of this because you have seen it. You know it because the house tells you. Here is something people rarely think about when they imagine a great household. Information moves downward through a building like water finds a drain, and the servants of a palace know the shape of the day before any newspaper in London does. Not because anyone gossips deliberately, though of course some do, but because the work itself carries the information. A page tells the steward's room that the boxes went up early and heavy, which means the Queen will not be walking before 11, which means the garden door need not be watched, which means the man who would have watched it is free to do something else. The order comes down through the housekeeper that the blue closet is not to be entered this morning, and everyone understands that somebody is going to be received there whose name has not been said aloud. A footman carries a tray up and observes that the coffee came back untouched. A dresser mentions to the housekeeper's maid that black is wanted rather than grey, and within an hour, without anyone announcing anything, the whole house has adjusted its expectations of what kind of day this is going to be. You have grown so accustomed to reading these signals that you no longer notice yourself doing it. This morning, the signals say the family is settled, nothing unusual is expected, and the staterooms are yours from 10:30. That is all you needed to know, and nobody has told you directly. A brief detour, because it explains a great deal about why the house works at all this morning. 20 years ago it did not. When the prince came to England, he found a household that had been assembled across 3 reigns and never once taken apart and rebuilt, and the results were close to comic if you did not have to live inside them. The building was divided between departments that answered to different great officers, and those officers answered, in effect, to nobody who was actually present in the building. The Lord Chamberlain's people were responsible for the inside of a room. The Lord Steward's people were responsible for something else in the same room. The master of the horse had the outside. The result was that a task requiring 2 hands frequently required 2 departments, and if one of them was slow, the task simply did not happen. Windows went uncleaned for months because the cleaning of the outside of the glass and the inside of the glass fell to different authorities. Rooms went unheated because the laying of a fire and the lighting of a fire were, in strict theory, separate functions of separate offices. A door that would not shut could wait weeks for a decision about whose door it was. Nobody was in charge of the house as a house. That is the sentence that explains everything. There was no single person who could walk through the building, see that something was wrong, and order it put right on their own authority. The prince fixed a great deal of this, and he was resented for fixing it, because the men whose offices were diminished had held them a long time and regarded them as property. What he did, in essence, was to gather practical control of the interior under the master of the household, a man actually resident, actually present, actually able to be found when a chimney smoked. He had the accounts examined, he had the waste catalogued, he had the number of people employed, compared against the number of people doing anything, and he found, as anyone would have found, that the 2 figures were not the same. He was a German prince of methodical habits and a tidy mind, dropped into an English institution that regarded method as vaguely impertinent, and he pushed anyway. The house you work in is the improved house. Keep that in mind when you hear the older servants complain about how it used to be better. What they mean is that it used to be easier to do nothing. There is a track of service in this building that you will never enter, and it is worth being clear about it, because from the outside, all servants look alike, and from the inside, they are not remotely alike. The dressers and the wardrobe maids belong to the Queen personally. They are not part of the general establishment in the way you are. They attend to her clothes, her hair, her jewels, her small daily requirements, and they are within arm's length of her for hours of every day. Some of them have been with her since before she came to the throne. They travel with her. They are spoken to, addressed by name, asked questions, occasionally confided in. One of them will hand her a shawl and be thanked for it, which is a transaction so ordinary and so far outside your world that you would not know how to arrange your face if it happened to you. They are also, and this is the part outsiders miss, tremendously hard-worked and rather isolated by their own privilege. They do not eat with the housemaids, and they are not comfortable in the steward's room either. Proximity to the person is the currency here, and it does not convert into friendship in either direction. You will not become one of them. The route is not open. A dresser is generally chosen from among women already trusted, often recommended, sometimes foreign, usually skilled with a needle to a degree that takes years to acquire. You clean rooms. The distinction is absolute, and everyone below stairs understands it perfectly. What that track produces, though, arrives in your world as an enormous quantity of cloth. Think for a moment about the clothing of a royal household as a material problem rather than a matter of fashion. Every person of the family changes several times a day. Morning dress, walking dress, a change for dinner, and for the Queen, a great deal else besides, because a monarch is expected to be visibly appropriate to every function she performs. Court dress for a drawing room is a separate category again, stiff with embroidery, weighted with a train, worn once in a season, and then stored. Add the children, add the visiting relations who bring their own servants and their own laundry. Add the household itself, several hundred people whose linen has to be washed by somebody, and the liveries, which are heavy, and the table linen, which is vast, and the bed linen for a house with more beds than most villages have inhabitants. The laundry is not done in the building. It goes out, by cart, in quantities that would keep a small commercial concern in business on their own, and it comes back, and it is counted. Counting is the whole art of it. Every item is marked and listed and checked against a book, because in a household this size, things that are not counted stop existing, and a dozen fine linen sheets can walk out of a door in a laundry basket as easily as a spoon can walk out in a pocket. And there is the matter of mourning, which in this era is not a mood, but a wardrobe and a set of rules. When a death occurs in a royal family, anywhere in Europe, the court goes into mourning by proclamation for a stated period, in a stated degree. General mourning means the whole household in black, and it means it by a particular date, which means dyers and dressmakers working through the night, and it means the trunks in the wardrobe rooms coming down again, and everything grey and lavender being put away. There are degrees of it. Full black, then black with white, then half mourning in grey and violet, each with its own permitted materials, each with its own moment of transition announced in the Gazette. Crepe, which is the dull, crimped silk used for the deepest stage, marks and spots, and cannot be brushed clean, and has to be replaced constantly. None of this is your department. All of it lands on your floor eventually, as more to carry, more to store, more to keep from the moths, more to move out of a room before you can sweep it. The bell in the passage sounds twice, and that is the signal you have been waiting for since before it was light. The family have gone through. The upper rooms on the principal floor are empty now, shutters open, fires burning where you laid them 4 hours ago, and for the next stretch of the morning, that whole enfilade of state apartments belongs to the women with brushes and cloths and pails of cold water, and to nobody else. You collect your things from the housemaid's cupboard on the half landing. Someone ahead of you on the stair is already carrying a box of dry tea leaves, damp enough to hold the dust down and dry enough not to stain, which tells you the carpets are being done first. You go up, and the corridor above smells of coal smoke and beeswax, and faintly of the river, which no amount of polish has ever managed to keep out of this house. The first room is done in a particular order, and the order does not change, because the order is what keeps 40 rooms from becoming chaos. Furniture first. The chairs are already under their loose covers of brown holland, a plain, unbleached linen that goes over everything the moment the family leaves a room and comes off the moment there is any prospect of them returning. 2 of you lift a sofa away from the wall rather than dragging it, because the casters mark the parquet, and a marked floor is a conversation with the housekeeper that nobody wants. The covers come off the smaller things, the card tables and the console, and are folded and set on a chair by the door. Then the windows are opened, then the sweeping begins, and everything after that is a question of dust and where you persuade it to go. Dust is the whole business. That is the thing nobody understands about this work from the outside. It is not that a room becomes dirty in some dramatic way. It is that a room in a coal-burning city fills continuously and invisibly with a fine grey deposit that settles on gilt and silk and marble at exactly the same rate, and the entire purpose of your morning is to move that deposit downward and outward until it can be carried away in a pail. You do not create cleanliness, you interrupt an accumulation. The tea leaves come out of the box in damp handfuls and are scattered across the carpet in a broad arc, and then the broom goes over them in short strokes, and the leaves gather the dust into themselves instead of letting it rise into the air and resettle 2 minutes later on the surfaces you are about to wipe. It works. It works better than anything else available to you, and it costs nothing, because the leaves are yesterday's from the servants' hall, dried on a tray by the still-room fire. When you have swept the whole length of a carpet, you have a ridge of grey-green sweepings at the far end, and that goes into the pail, and that is 1 room's worth of London. Different surfaces want different things, and you have known this so long that it does not feel like knowledge. Gilt is not washed. Gilt is brushed, very lightly, with a soft brush kept only for gilt, because the gold on those picture frames and on the legs of those chairs is leaf, thinner than paper, laid over gesso, and a damp cloth will lift it off in a strip and leave a dull white scar that no one can repair without sending for a man from a firm in London who charges by the day. Marble takes a cloth wrung nearly dry, and never soap, because soap leaves a bloom on marble that shows worse than the dust did. Ormolu, which is the gilded bronze on the clocks and the candelabra and the mounts of the cabinets, is dusted and left alone entirely, because it tarnishes if you breathe on it wrong, and cleaning it properly is a specialist's job, done once in a very long while. Glass takes vinegar and water, and then newspaper, crumpled, which polishes better than any cloth, and leaves no lint. Wallpaper, and there is a great deal of wallpaper, is cleaned with bread. Stale bread, the crumb only, a day or two old so that it is firm but not hard, rubbed downward in long strokes so that it picks up the smoke film without smearing it. You go through a loaf on a wall of any size, and the floor beneath fills with grey crumbs that then have to be swept as well. Silk hangings are not cleaned at all, in any real sense. They are beaten gently with a long-handled brush and prayed over. Here is something worth slowing down for, because it explains more about this house than the inventories do. There is no machine anywhere in this building that removes dust. Not one. The suction cleaner does not exist and will not exist for another 40 years. Every particle of dirt lifted out of these rooms is lifted by a hand holding cloth, brush, bread, or broom, and carried down a back stair in a pail by a woman who then carries the empty pail back up. The carpets that cannot be swept adequately are taken up entirely, carried outside, hung over a line, and struck with a cane beater until nothing more comes out of them, which is a thing done in spring and autumn and is spoken of the way other people speak of harvest. And there are, depending on how you count corridors and closets and the rooms nobody uses, something on the order of 700 rooms in this house. You will never clean 700 rooms. Nobody will. The work is organized on a rotation, and the rotation is the only honest thing in the building. The rooms the family actually inhabit are done every day, thoroughly, before 9 in the morning. The principal reception rooms are done properly, perhaps once a week, when the court is here, and hardly at all when it is not. And then there is the enormous remainder, the state apartments used for a levee twice a year, the guest suites kept for visitors who come once a decade, the rooms on the upper floors of wings that hold furniture under sheets and nothing else, and those are turned out in a full cleaning, perhaps twice a year, sometimes once. A room in this palace can go 8 months untouched, except for a woman opening the door, looking in, and closing it again. This is not idleness, it is arithmetic. Divide the housemaids by the rooms, and you get the answer. And the answer is that the grandest house in the kingdom is, over most of its surface, dusty. It is worse than dusty in places, and everyone who has written honestly about this building has said so. The drains are the great subject. There are reports, actual official reports, commissioned and written and read by men in offices, on the sanitary state of this palace, and they are not flattering. The building sits low, on ground that was a mulberry garden, and before that was marshy, and the drainage was laid piecemeal over 100 years by different men who did not consult one another, and in warm weather, the smell in certain basement corridors is something you learn to walk through quickly with your mouth closed. There are cesspools under parts of the house. There are ventilation shafts that carry air from places you would rather it did not come from, into places where people sleep. The prince has views on this. The prince has views on most things concerning this building, and drains are near the top of a long list. Damp is the other permanent tenant. Water comes up through the lower floors and down through the roofs, and there are rooms where the paper lifts from the wall in a slow bubble and has to be pasted back, and where the plaster is soft to a fingernail. Chimneys smoke. That is the third complaint, and it is chronic, and it is in the letters and the memoranda and the household correspondence again and again for years. The staterooms have fireplaces that were built by an architect for the look of the thing, and vent badly, and when the wind sits in a certain quarter, the smoke comes out into the room instead of going up, and the ceilings darken, and the pictures darken, and a housemaid spends a morning on a stepladder with bread and a brush, undoing what the wind did in an evening. So when someone tells you later, and someone will, that this was the finest house in England, hold two things at once. The pictures on those walls are worth more than the entire wage bill of the household for a century, and the room they hang in is cold, smells faintly of the drain in the corridor below it, and has soot in the cornice that will not come out. You are in the long room now, at the far end, alone, because the others have moved through, and you stayed to finish the skirting. The covers are back on the chairs, pale brown shapes in a row like sheep. The shutters are open, and the light coming in is the flat white light of a London morning in February, no shadows in it at all. The ceiling is a very long way up. There is a great deal of gold on it, and the gold is at a height where nobody has looked at it closely in years, and nobody will. You stand up from the skirting board, and your knees complain, and you put a hand flat on the small of your back, the way every woman in this house does, and you take one step, and the sound of it goes out into the room and comes back to you from somewhere near the other end. That is the thing that gets you, on the days it gets you. The size, not the gold, the size. You could put the whole of the street you grew up on inside this room, all of it, both sides, and have space at the ends. There is a clock on the chimney piece that is ticking, and it is the only other sound, and the two of you are alone together in a space built to hold 400 people and currently holding one housemaid and a pail of grey water. You have been in this room perhaps 30 times. You have never once been in it with the family in it. You know it better than they do. You know which board by the third window gives slightly, and that the left-hand shutter sticks in wet weather, and that there is a chip in the plaster behind the far door where a footman's tray caught it in some year before you came. Nobody else knows those things. Nobody else has any reason to. You pick up the pail. The water in it is the color of weak tea, which is what a morning looks like when you pour it out. On the way to the door, you pass the tall glass between the windows, and there is a woman in it in a print dress, with her sleeves pushed up and her hair coming down at one side, walking through a hall of gilded columns, carrying dirty water, and you fix your hair without stopping, the way you would in any looking glass anywhere, and you go out and pull the door to behind you. The corridor you come out into runs east, and if you follow it far enough, it stops being a corridor and becomes a kind of road. That is the only word for it. The service passages under and behind the staterooms are wide enough for two men with a hamper between them, and by late morning they are busy in the way a market street is busy, with traffic going both ways and everybody understanding, without saying so, who gives way to whom. At the far end of it is the tradesman's entrance, and the tradesman's entrance at 11:30, on a day when the court is in residence, is the busiest square yard in the building. You do not go out there often. You have no business with it. But you pass the mouth of it on your way to the housemaid's closet with your pail, and you can see out into the yard, and there is always something arriving. Baskets of vegetables under damp sacking, crates of fowl, a butcher's cart backed up to the step with the boy holding the horse's head. Ice wrapped in straw and blanket being carried in by two men walking the peculiar, careful walk of people holding something that is quietly turning into water in their arms. Milk, bread in long, flat baskets on a man's head, candles in boxes, linen going out dirty and linen coming back clean, in different carts, by different men, on different days. None of it stops. That is the thing to understand about the food of a great house. It is not a series of deliveries. It is a current, Something is arriving at the back of this building during nearly every hour that the light is up, and has been since before you were born, and will be after. Here is something easy to misunderstand about a palace. People imagine a royal kitchen as a place of luxury and invention, a kind of theatre of swans and sugar. Some of it is, most of it is not. Most of it is volume. The kitchens of this house exist first and foremost to put a hot dinner in front of several hundred people every single day, most of whom are servants, and only after that do they concern themselves with anything a newspaper would find worth printing. The kitchens are their own country. You are not really a citizen of it. Housemaids belong to one department, the kitchens to another, and the border between them is watched on both sides. At the top of that country is the chef. And a royal chef, in this century, is a man of standing and salary, a professional in a way that almost nobody else below stairs is permitted to be. Beneath him there are master cooks, roasting cooks, pastry cooks, apprentices, kitchen maids, scullery maids, and a man whose whole occupation is the turning and management of what happens at the fire. There are separate rooms for pastry and for confectionery, because sugar work needs a cool room, and a roasting range needs the opposite, and a house that can afford it gives each of them a room. There are tempers in that country, everyone knows this. Heat and hurry and a fixed hour do that to any kitchen, from a cottage upward, and this one has a fixed hour every day for years on end. You have learned, as everyone learns in their first month here, not to walk through the kitchen passage at 10 minutes to a service, and not to ask a kitchen maid a question when she is carrying anything, and not to remark on the smell of it if you are hungry, which you generally are. A brief detour now, because the numbers are the part people find hardest to believe. Feeding this establishment costs, in a year, something in the order of tens of thousands of pounds. Set that beside your own wages, which come to a little over £20 a year, and the arithmetic becomes uncomfortable to hold in your head for very long. The household consumes meat by the ton. It consumes flour by the ton. It gets through hundreds of gallons of milk in a month, and takes in game and fish and fruit from estates as well as from London tradesmen, so that a good deal of what arrives never appears in a bill at all, which is one reason the true cost of the table is difficult to state exactly, even now. Then there is beer. Every servant in the house has an allowance of it, or money instead of it, and beer money is one of the things you count as part of your pay rather than as a kindness. The brewing and buying of beer for a household of hundreds is not a minor line in the accounts. It is a substantial one. Then there is wax. This is the part of the palace's economy that became, for a while, a small national joke, and it is worth slowing down for, because it explains more about how a great household actually worked than any number of stories about gold plate. Candles here are not bought as you would buy a candle. They are issued. Wax candles go up to the rooms in the morning, and every room that is in use gets its fresh candles, and the old ones come down again, whether they have burned an inch or not. That is the rule. A room in use is a room with fresh candles. Nobody in the family or in the higher household is ever to walk into a room and find a stub. So the stubs come down, bushels of them, wax candles barely touched, half candles, whole candles that were carried up and set out, and never lit at all, because the room was not entered that evening. And by long custom, those become the property of the servants who collect them, which is to say, they are sold. There is a trade in the palace's unburned wax, and it has gone on so long that nobody thinks of it as anything but the ordinary shape of the world. That is a perquisite. Every large house runs on them, and this one runs on hundreds of them. The dripping from the roasting fire belongs by right to the cook and is sold. The bottle ends belong to somebody. The used tea leaves have a value. Cast-off clothing comes down from the wardrobe rooms and passes hand to hand and finds its way at last into a dealer's shop off some street you have never walked down. Rabbit skins, feathers, ashes, bones, the fat skimmed off a stock pot. Nothing in a house like this is thrown away. It is simply reassigned, downward, until it reaches somebody poor enough to want it, and then it is sold. You will hear this called corruption when it is written about later, and there is something in that. It is also, seen from where you stand, the reason a housemaid's £20 a year is survivable at all. The wage is not the wage. The wage is the wage plus the bed, plus the food, plus the beer, plus whatever comes to your hand by right or by custom. Take away the perquisites, and half the servants in London could not afford to be servants. The trouble is that a system like that has no natural stopping place. If unburned candles have a value, there is no incentive anywhere in the house to burn fewer candles. If dripping belongs to the cook, more dripping is better than less. Waste stops being waste and becomes income, and the whole enormous apparatus quietly tilts toward using more of everything, forever, and nobody in it is doing anything they consider wrong. The man whose business this is, in theory, is the master of the household, and it is his department that keeps the ledgers. Those ledgers are the reason any of this can be described at all. This is worth saying plainly, because it is easy to imagine that the past comes down to us through diaries and portraits. Mostly, it comes down through accounts. Somebody in an office in this building is writing, in a clear clerk's hand, the quantities of meat received this week, the price paid, the supplier, the number of loaves, the gallons, the pounds of wax issued, and the pounds returned, the wages paid at the quarter, and to whom, the sums allowed for beer, the cost of coals. Those books are dull to the point of pain to the man writing them. They are also, more than anything anyone in this house will ever say aloud, the truth of it. From ledgers like those it is possible, a century and more later, to say how many people sat down to dinner below stairs on an ordinary Tuesday, and what they ate, and what it cost, and how much of it was thrown out, and which offices were paid for and no longer did anything. A household of hundreds leaves almost no letters. It leaves receipts. You are told nothing about any of this, of course. You know your own wage and your own quarter day, and what your beer money comes to, and beyond that, the economy of the palace is a weather system happening above your head. But you know its effects the way anyone knows weather. You know that the candles come down unburned because you have carried the tray of them. You know the ice comes because you have seen the straw in the yard. You know the linen goes and returns because there is a room where it is counted. By the time you have emptied your pail and rinsed it and set it in its place, the smell has begun. It is the smell of a dinner for a great many people getting underway somewhere below and to the east, and it comes up through the service stair the way it does every day at about this hour, and it is not delicate. It is roasting meat and hot fat and onions and steam, and under it the flat mineral smell of the coppers, and it fills the back corridors and stops at the baize doors as though it had been told to. Your own dinner is hours off. The family will eat first, and the upper servants after that in their own room, and you and the rest of the hall in your turn, in a fixed order that nobody has ever needed to explain to you. You wipe your hands on your apron, and you go back along the corridor with the smell of somebody else's dinner following you the whole way. The forecourt begins to fill a little after 1 o'clock. You hear it before you see any of it. The gravel gives a particular sound under carriage wheels, a dry crunching that carries through stone walls better than voices do, and when there are 40 carriages instead of 4, the sound stops being separate and becomes continuous, like rain on a roof. Then the horses, then the men calling to one another, coachmen and grooms, and the police constables who are there to keep the line moving, and the whole front of the house takes on a note it does not have on ordinary days. Today is a presentation. The Queen will receive, in the afternoon, a long file of women who have been brought to be shown to her, and the front of the palace has been arranged for it since first light. You have had no part in the arranging. That is not your work. But you have watched the effects of it accumulate all morning, the way you watch weather. Extra men in the corridors near the staterooms, in full livery, standing about with the particular stiffness of people who have been dressed by somebody else. The great doors between the green drawing room and the throne room standing open, which they are not on ordinary days. Chairs moved. A carpet you have never seen before, unrolled along a passage you use every day, so that the passage is briefly not yours. The choreography of the thing, seen from the front, is meant to look effortless. Seen from your side of the wall, it is a timetable. The carriages arrive in an order settled in advance and enforced outside in the road, sometimes for 2 hours, because 100 carriages cannot set down at once, and nobody may arrive out of turn. The women come up through the grand hall and the staircase, and are relieved of cloaks in a room set aside for it, and then they wait. They wait a very long time. That is the part nobody writes down afterwards, though it is most of the experience. They stand in their trains and their feathers, in a room that has been warmed by fires, you laid at 6 in the morning, and they wait, and the line moves forward, a few feet at a time. Then, at the top, each of them is announced, and goes forward, and makes her curtsy, and does not turn her back on the Queen as she withdraws, which is harder than it sounds when you are wearing several yards of train. The whole encounter takes perhaps 20 seconds. Some of these women have spent months preparing for it, and a sum of money that would keep you for years. This is worth slowing down for, because the cost of a presentation is one of those figures that tells you more about the century than a long argument would. To be presented at court, a woman had to be presented by a woman who had already been presented, which is the entire mechanism in a sentence. It was not an examination, and it was not a purchase. It was a vouching. Somebody already inside the enclosure said, in effect, "This one belongs," and the enclosure widened by exactly one person. That is how a closed thing stays closed while appearing to admit people. Then there was the dress. Court dress was prescribed, not chosen. A train of a set length, worn from the shoulders, plumes in the hair, 3 of them, and a veil, white, generally, for a young woman being presented for the first time. None of it could be worn anywhere else afterwards for any purpose whatsoever, because there was nowhere else it was correct. So a family paid a dressmaker a very considerable sum for a garment with one use of 20 seconds, and then paid again for the hire of a carriage grand enough to be seen arriving in, and paid the servants' wages of the day, and paid for the hairdresser who came at 7 in the morning to build the feathers into place. A modest presentation might cost a family £60 or £80. An ambitious one could cost several hundred. Your wage, all found, is somewhere near £18 a year. And what was it for? Not for the Queen, who could not possibly remember any of them, and who by this year in her life found the whole business a duty rather than a pleasure. It was for the room. Being presented meant a girl could go to certain balls, be considered by certain families, be spoken of in a certain way. It was the formal opening of the marriage market to her, conducted as a religious ceremony and priced like a wedding. The 20 seconds in front of the Queen was the receipt. Here is something easy to misunderstand about it. You might expect that the people who did this were all enormously grand. Most of them were not. The genuinely grand did not need it in the same way, because everybody already knew who they were. The presentation ranks filled up with the daughters of the almost, the newly comfortable, the professional, and the mercantile, and the county families anxious about their footing. It was a ladder used hardest by the people nearest the bottom rung of the thing that had a ladder at all. You know none of this in the shape I have just given it. You know it in fragments, in the way anyone knows the trade they stand next to. You know it costs a great deal, because you have heard a dresser say so. You know the plumes are a nuisance, because you have picked one off a floor. Your work this afternoon is to be where you are needed, and to be nowhere else, and the second half of that is the harder skill. There is a rule in every great house that a servant should not be seen by the family in the family's part of the house, and in the palace, on a day like this, the rule tightens until it is nearly a law of physics. You do not walk down a corridor a guest may walk down. If you must cross one, you cross it fast, and at a moment when it is empty. If you hear feet coming, and there is a door, you go through the door. If there is no door, there is usually an alcove, or a curtained recess, or the deep reveal of a window, and you step into it, and turn your face toward the wall, and stand still. That is the whole of the technique. Face to the wall, hands still, eyes down. You do not greet. You do not step aside with a small bob and a murmur, which is what a shopkeeper would do, because a shopkeeper is a person the customer is meant to see. You do the other thing. You subtract yourself. It works remarkably well, and the reason it works is not that the recess is deep. It is that the people coming down the corridor have been trained just as thoroughly as you have, and their training is not to look. Two educations, meeting in a passage, agreeing to produce an empty room. You have stood in a window recess with your face 6 inches from a shutter, while a duchess and her daughter went by close enough that the train brushed your shoe, and neither of them saw you, and neither of them failed to see you either. That is the distinction. They knew perfectly well that there was a housemaid in the window. They simply did not permit it to have happened. And so you learn, without anyone intending it, a great deal about people who would be astonished to hear it. You know which of the great families quarrel in carriages and arrange their faces on the stairs. You know that a woman who is famous for her serenity holds her hands so tightly in the waiting room that she leaves marks. You know which men drink before a levee, and which of them come very early, because they are frightened of being late. And you know which mothers are kind to their daughters in the moment before the doors, and which are not. You know that the feathers slip, that the trains catch, that people who are terrified go very quiet, and people who are merely nervous cannot stop talking, and that a great deal of what looks in a print like effortless assurance is a woman counting her own steps. None of this makes you their equal. It does not even make you their observer in any sense they would recognize. But it is a genuine kind of knowledge, and it is knowledge of a sort they cannot get about you at all, because they have never once looked long enough to have any. The presentation ends at about 4:30, in the way such things end, all at once. The line at the top simply runs out. Word travels backwards down the file, faster than any messenger, and within 20 minutes, the waiting rooms are emptying, and the cloaks are coming back off their hooks, and the forecourt fills up again in the reverse direction, which takes longer and is worse tempered, because everybody wants to leave at the same time, and the carriages have been standing an hour in the mall. The gravel noise builds and goes on, and then, quite suddenly, thins. You come out of the back passage and into the green drawing room, maybe a quarter of an hour after the last of them, and it is a wreck of a particular polite kind. Nothing is broken, nothing is even disarranged, exactly. But the chairs have been moved a few inches from their proper places by 400 people passing close to them, and there are gloves on a side table, and a fan, and somebody's card, and a good deal of what you will find on the carpet is white feather barbs, and there is a smell in the room that is scent and hot wax and hair oil and a great many warm bodies, which will take until tomorrow to go. You and the others begin at the far end and work back. Windows opened 2 inches at the top. Chairs walked back to their marks. The gloves and the fan and the card go to the housekeeper's room, where lost property is entered in a book and kept a 12-month. Then the covers. Great sheets of holland, folded flat since morning, shaken out and laid over the gilt chairs and the sofas and the long tables one by one, so that the room goes from gold to a soft, dull cream as you move down it, shape by shape, the way a street goes out when the lamps are put down. By 5, the doors between the rooms are closed again. The carpet in your passage has been rolled and taken away, and the passage is yours once more, and the green drawing room stands behind its shutters, full of shrouded furniture, exactly as it stood yesterday, with no sign at all that 400 people came through it in an afternoon. 3 in the afternoon, or as near as you will get to it on a presentation day, and you go up the back stair to change your dress. This is not a small thing, and it is not a courtesy. It is household law. The print dress you have worn since 5 in the morning is a working garment, cotton, striped or sprigged, washable, worn with a coarse apron that has had coal on it, and ash on it, and blacklead on it before breakfast. It goes off. In its place comes the black stuff dress, plain, high to the throat, with a white apron over it that has never touched a grate, white cuffs, and a cap. In the morning, you are a person who cleans. In the afternoon, you are a person who might, at some unlucky moment, be seen. The dress is the difference between those 2 conditions, and the household holds the difference to be real. You wash first, in cold water, in the room you share, with the door wedged because the latch has never sat properly. There is a particular relief in getting the morning's dress off your shoulders that has nothing to do with cleanliness. It is simply that the black dress is a lighter kind of day. Nobody will ask you to carry a scuttle in it. Your hair goes up again, tighter. The cap goes on over it. You look at yourself in a piece of glass the size of a book, propped on the sill, because the room has no proper mirror and never has had, and what you are checking for is not whether you look well. You are checking for anything that would be remarked on: a loose strand, a smudge on the cuff, a crooked cap. The whole art of the afternoon is to present a surface so uniform that the eye passes over it without stopping. And then you go down to be inspected, because at 3:30 the housekeeper walks the linen room and the still room and the stores, and the housemaids of your floor stand where she can see them. She is not unkind. She is not kind either. She is a woman of about 50 who has been in great houses since she was younger than you are now, and she carries at her waist a ring of keys that is the most eloquent object in the entire building. Consider the keys for a moment, because they are the whole of her authority, made into iron. She holds the stores: tea, sugar, candles, soap, starch, dried fruit, spices, wax, the linen in its presses, the spare blankets, the china that is not in daily use. None of it moves without her. A housemaid who wants a fresh cloth applies to her. A footman who wants candles applies through his own superior to her. Everything that is consumed in the running of the house is consumed under her hand, entered in her book, and accounted for at the end of the quarter. The linen room itself is one of the pleasant rooms of the house, which is a strange thing to say about a room with no ornament in it at all. It is long and dry and warm because it must be kept dry, and the presses go up the walls, and every shelf has its label, and the sheets lie in stacks with lavender bags between them, and the whole room smells of clean cotton and lavender, and the faint scorch of a hot iron. There is a table down the middle where the linen is examined. Every sheet that comes back from the laundry is looked at. Thin places are marked. Torn places are mended by the sewing maids, or, if the sheet is far enough gone, it is cut down. A sheet for the family's beds becomes, in stages over years, a sheet for a servant's bed, then a pillowcase, then a dust sheet, then a rag. Nothing in this house is thrown away, while any use remains in it, which sits oddly beside the gold plate in the pantry downstairs, and which you have stopped thinking about, because thinking about it does not change either fact. The housekeeper's own position deserves a proper look, because it is one of the few places in this world where a woman of no family at all ends up with real power and a real income. She has a sitting room of her own. That alone puts her in a different country from you. She takes her dinner with the other upper servants in the steward's room, not in the hall. She is called by the courtesy title of a married woman, whether or not she has ever been married, which is a custom of the profession. Her wages in a household of this kind run to something in the region of £60 or £70 a year, sometimes more, against your own 12 or 14. And on top of that, she has her board, her tea and sugar allowance, and the perquisites that attach to the office, which in a great house can be worth a good deal. How does a woman arrive there? Slowly, and by never once being careless. She began as you began, or lower, perhaps in a smaller house as a maid of all work. She rose to housemaid, then to head housemaid, then to lady's maid, or still room maid in some establishment, and somewhere along the way she made herself indispensable to a mistress who was willing to write for her. Every step of that ladder was crossed on the strength of a written character, and a written character is the whole of a servant's capital. It is a letter from your last place saying that you are honest, sober, clean, and civil, and that you left of your own accord or by no fault. Without it, you are not employable in a good house. With a doubtful one, you are not employable at all. 20 years of blameless work sits in a folded sheet of paper in the bottom of a box, and every servant in this building knows exactly where hers is. Which brings up the question of how anybody comes to be here in the first place, since you were asked it once by a cousin who could not imagine it. Nobody advertises for a palace housemaid in a newspaper. The places go by connection. Somebody's sister is already in the household. Somebody's mother was in service to a family whose daughter married into a family that supplies pages. A clergyman writes for a girl in his parish. A tradesman who supplies the house has a niece. The queue for a place is long, and entirely invisible, and it moves by acquaintance rather than by merit, though merit is required once you are through the door. You came because your aunt had been 15 years with a household in the same street as a lady of the bedchamber, and because your character was good, and because you could read and write a fair hand, which matters more than people suppose, since a housemaid who cannot read the labels on the stores is a nuisance to everybody. The wages are not why anyone comes. A general servant in a modest London house might earn nearly as much. What you get here is the name of the place. To have been 3 years in the royal household and to leave with a good character is to be able to walk into almost any establishment in the country afterwards. It is the best reference an English servant can hold. Everybody in the attics knows it, and it is one of the reasons the attics are quiet at 5 in the morning, rather than mutinous. And then there is the other question, the one nobody discusses at dinner, but everybody has considered. Service is not a career with a natural end. There is no pension in it. There is no age at which the household says, "Well done, sit down." The ordinary exit is marriage, and marriage means leaving, because a married housemaid is a contradiction the establishment does not employ. So the arithmetic every young woman in this house performs, quietly, is this: what you give up when you go, against what you go to. You give up the certainty of a bed, and 3 meals, and a fire in the hall, and a place in a structure that has been perfectly legible to you since you were 16. You give up the character you have spent years building, in the sense that you will not use it again. You go to a set of rooms somewhere, with a man on a tradesman's wage, and to a household with no housekeeper in it but yourself, and no linen room, and nobody above you, and nobody below. Some of the women here talk about it constantly, some never mention it. The head housemaid on your floor is 38 and has been in service since she was 13 and has said, in the hall, in the tone of somebody stating the weather, that she does not intend to marry, and nobody asked her anything further. You have not decided anything. You are 24. The decision has a few years in it yet. At 4:30, the bell goes for the servants' tea, and you go down. This is the first time since 5 o'clock this morning that you sit down without a reason to get up again in a moment. Tea in the hall is bread and butter, and a great deal of strong tea, and, on a good day, a plate of cake gone slightly stale from upstairs, which is nobody's perquisite in particular, and therefore everybody's. The talk is about the afternoon, how many carriages, whose feathers came apart, which of the pages had trouble with a door, what the room smelled like. Everybody has an opinion about the drawing room, and nobody has an opinion about the 400 people who were in it, who are already, at 4:30, entirely gone from this house and from this conversation. You hold the cup in both hands because the hall is cold, and you can feel the day in your shoulders and in the arches of your feet, and you have perhaps 3 hours of work ahead of you before the house goes quiet. Somebody says there are 22 to dinner upstairs. Somebody else says nothing at all, and puts down the cup and stands up. 22 to dinner is not a large number in this house. It is a family dinner, which in the palace means something closer to what an ordinary household would call a banquet, and it means that between now and 8 o'clock, a great many people who have already worked 11 hours will work 5 more. You are not one of the ones who serves it. Housemaids do not go into the dining room while the family is at table. That is the footman's territory, and the pages, and the men in the state livery with the scarlet and the gold lace, and there is a rigid line between the work of hands that carry dishes and the work of hands that carry coal. But the meal reaches you anyway, the way weather reaches you. Every corridor on your side of the house is suddenly a thoroughfare. The green baize doors go back and forth all evening with a soft double thud you stop hearing after the first hour. You flatten yourself against wainscoting more times in that hour than you have all day. Watch how the dishes travel, because the traveling is the whole difficulty. The kitchens sit at a considerable distance from the room where the food is eaten. This is deliberate, and it is a design principle rather than an accident. Great houses put their kitchens far from their dining rooms so that the smell of cooking and the noise of it and the heat of it never reach the people eating. The result, everywhere in England, in every large house of the period, is that hot food arrives less hot than it left. There are staircases in between. There are passages. In the very largest houses there are courtyards. A dish leaves a stove at a temperature that would burn your hand and arrives at a table pleasant to eat and, quite often, disappointing. Every solution to this was some form of running. Hot closets stood along the route, cupboards heated by their own small fires or by hot water, where a dish could be set down and held. Serving dishes were made with wells beneath them that took boiling water. Covers were heavy silver domes that trapped what warmth remained. And men carried, at speed, in a line, in the dark parts of the house, and slowed to a walk the moment they came through into the light. The dignity of the meal upstairs is entirely constructed out of a great deal of undignified hurrying 20 feet away behind a door. The order of the meal itself is a kind of clockwork. Dinner comes in courses, and each course comes to the table all at once, in an arrangement, several dishes set down together in a pattern that has been decided in advance. Nobody is handed a plate of one thing. The table is dressed with the course, and then it is cleared entirely, and then it is dressed again with the next. The clearing is as choreographed as the setting. There are men whose entire function during those minutes is to remove one thing at a precisely correct moment so that another thing may be put where it was. This means the kitchen is not cooking a meal. The kitchen is meeting a schedule in which 12 or 15 separate preparations must arrive at the same door within the same 90 seconds, 3 or 4 separate times over the course of 2 hours, and the difference between a very good evening and a very bad one is measured in the time it takes a man to cross a corridor. The plate is a separate world again, and it has its own room and its own rules. The gold plate and the great silver of the royal household are kept under an arrangement that would look, to anybody who has worked in a bank, entirely familiar. There is a pantry for it. There are officers whose titles refer to it directly, the yeomen of the gold and silver pantry, and their work is not decorative. Every piece that leaves that room is written down. Every piece that comes back is written down again, and the two lists are compared, and if the lists do not agree, nobody sleeps until they do. The counting happens before the meal and after the meal. It happens with 2 people present. A gold dessert service is not a possession in the way a chair is a possession. It is closer to bullion with a pattern on it, and it is treated with the seriousness that implies. You have never touched any of it. You have seen it go past on a tray, covered, in a corridor, twice in 3 years, and the second time you noticed that a man was walking behind the man carrying it, not helping, simply walking behind, and it took you a moment to understand that he was there to be a witness. Washing it is its own trade. Gold and silver are not scoured. They are washed in soft water, dried immediately and rubbed with a leather, and the rubbing is done in one direction, and the person doing it has been shown how by somebody who was shown by somebody else, and none of it is written down anywhere except in the hands of the people who do it. A footman who is careless with a plate rim is not merely clumsy. He has damaged a numbered object that will be inspected. The number of men on the floor for a dinner of 22 is larger than you would guess. The old rule of thumb in great houses is roughly one servant standing to every 2 or 3 at table, and at a royal dinner it runs closer to 1 to 2, because there is not only service but ceremony, and because there are pages of the presence and pages of the back stairs and men on the doors who are not serving anything at all but must be there. So there may be a dozen men in that room, and behind them another dozen in the passage, and behind those the whole apparatus of the kitchen, and the whole thing exists so that 22 people may have a quiet evening. By 9:30, the traffic in your corridors has thinned. The dessert has gone up, the coffee has gone up, and the men coming back down are carrying things that no longer need to be hot, and are walking rather than trotting, and are talking again, which they were not doing an hour ago. This is the part of the evening the household likes. The prince has made music a fixture of the house. He plays the organ and the piano, he composes a little, he takes the business of a musical evening seriously, in a way that has changed what happens in these rooms after dinner. Sometimes there are professional singers brought in. Sometimes it is the family themselves at the instrument. Mendelssohn came here, more than once, and played, and the story of it is told in this house by people who were not born when it happened. You will not hear it properly. What you hear is what comes through a door left ajar by somebody who left it ajar on purpose, or what comes up a staircase and turns a corner and arrives thinned out and strange, a piano and a voice with all the middle of it worn away by distance. You will find, if you are on that floor at that hour, that the other maids have arranged their work so as to be on that floor at that hour, and that nobody says so, and that everybody moves rather slowly, with a duster in her hand, near the top of the stairs. Then the work resumes, because the whole upper floor has to be made ready for people who will come to it in an hour, expecting it to have been ready all along. You go through the bedrooms with another maid, shutters closed and barred, curtains drawn, and the heavy ones drawn over the light ones, fires made up so that they will hold, not blaze, which is a different way of building a fire and takes longer to learn than it sounds, beds turned down at the corner, warming pans, which are brass, long-handled, filled with hot coals, and run in a slow figure between the sheets, so that they warm the linen without scorching it, and a pan left in one place for 4 seconds too long leaves a brown mark that no laundry in England will take out. Lamps trimmed. There are men whose whole employment is lamps in this house, but the small lamps in the private rooms come to you, the wick cut level, the char taken off, the glass cleaned of the film that a day of burning leaves on it, the oil topped, a badly trimmed wick smokes, and a smoking lamp puts a grey ghost on a white ceiling within a week, and a ceiling is not a thing a housemaid can put right. Water carried up, cans of hot water covered with a cloth to hold the heat, set in the washstands, chamber candles set out in a row on a table near the stairs with a box of matches beside them, one for each person who will go up, because the corridors will be dark. You do this in near silence, because the rule about being unseen extends to being unheard, and because you are tired now in a way that has stopped being interesting. Your hands know all of it. That is a real thing, and worth naming. 3 years ago you would have had to think about the order of the shutters. Now you could do this floor in the dark, and on 1 or 2 occasions you have. Below you the house is draining. The kitchen fires are being banked. The scullery is at its worst hour, and will be for another one. The silver pantry is lit, and will stay lit until the counting agrees. The men in livery are coming down and undoing their collars on the stairs, which they would not do on any staircase where they might be seen, and one of them is complaining about a door, and one of them is eating something off a plate with his fingers while he walks. And upstairs the music stops, and there is a small sound of chairs, and 22 people move from one room into another, and none of them will think tonight about where the water in their basin came from, or who cut the wick of the lamp they read by, or how many hands the plate they ate from passed through between the pantry and the table and back to the pantry again, where it is being counted. 10 at night, and the house begins its second discipline, which is the discipline of shutting down. You hear it before you see it. There is a particular sound a very large building makes when it is being closed for the night, and it is not one sound but a sequence of them, spaced out over the better part of an hour, moving through the fabric of the place like weather bolts. The heavier note of a door in the state floor being drawn to, and the lighter note of a bedroom door somewhere above you, a shutter bar dropping into its bracket, somewhere, a long way off, on the ground floor of the north wing, a man walking with keys, and the keys announcing him a room and a half before he arrives. The counting has finished in the silver pantry, or it has not, and if it has not, then nobody in that room is going to bed until it does. The gold plate is locked behind iron. 2 men sleep near it, and that is part of what they are paid for, and it is understood without anyone ever putting it in a written instruction that the plate is guarded more carefully than any person in the building. Candles are counted too, not with the same solemnity, but counted. The chamber candlesticks that went up the stairs are expected to come back down in the morning, and the housekeeper's department knows how many went out and will know how many return, and the difference between those 2 numbers is a small ongoing argument that has been running in this house since before you were born and will be running long after you leave it. Here is something worth slowing down for, because it explains more about this building than almost anything else. You would assume that the grandest house in the kingdom is the best lit house in the kingdom. It is not. In the year you are living through, gas has been in ordinary London streets for decades. It is in shops, it is in railway stations and factories, and the front halls of merchants with 1/10 of the money that passes through this establishment in a month. And in this palace, gas has been fitted in some places and refused in others, and the reasoning is a mixture of taste, caution, and the plain difficulty of altering a building that 4 separate departments each believe they are responsible for. The objections to gas are not stupid. It smells, it blackens ceilings, and it eats gilding, and it tarnishes silver, and there are rooms in this house where the decoration cost more than a small estate, and nobody is enthusiastic about hanging a fixture in them that will slowly turn the paint the color of weak tea. There is also the matter of what gas does to the air of a closed room full of people in heavy clothes. So the staterooms keep their candles and their oil lamps, and the working corridors get what they get, and the result is a house where the most magnificent spaces are lit by the oldest method available, and the passages behind them are lit barely at all. Which is why there is an entire small trade inside this establishment devoted to lamps, men whose working life is wicks, glass, and oil. They fill, and they trim, and they clean. and the cleaning is the larger half of it, because oil lamps produce a fine, greasy black that settles on the glass and dulls the light within hours. A lamp that has not been seen to is not a lamp that gives less light. It is a lamp that gives about half the light and smells faintly of a kitchen. So the wicks are cut every day, flat and square, and the chimneys are wiped, and the reservoirs are filled from cans carried up back stairs, and this is a full occupation for several grown men in a house that also employs someone whose formal responsibility is the arrangement of a table. You do your own share of it on your floor. Trimming a lamp is a small skill and a satisfying one. The wick comes up on the key, you take the charred crust off it clean across, you set it back down until the flame stands steady, with no point at the top of it, and the light in the room changes and steadies as you do it, and the room becomes a slightly kinder place to be. It takes perhaps a minute. You have done it several thousand times. The house at night is a different building. That sounds like a phrase, and it is not. In daylight, the size of the place is impressive, but comprehensible, because there are people in it, and people give a room a scale. At night, the people withdraw into perhaps a dozen rooms out of hundreds, and what is left is volume. Corridors you cannot see the end of, doorways standing open onto rooms with the furniture under covers, so that what you see, going past with a candle, is a suggestion of white shapes and nothing more. The staterooms hold the cold they have been holding all winter, and they hold it better than any other rooms in London, because they are enormous, and they are stone, and the fires that warmed them went out 3 hours ago. And the sound. A building of this size never quite settles. Timber moves. Somewhere in the roof there is water in a pipe. A door 2 floors below closes, and you hear it in your own corridor, distinctly, as though it had happened in the next room, because the shape of the stairwells carries sound in ways that nobody designed and nobody can now undo. You learned in your first month which noises are the house and which noises are a person, and you no longer look up for the first kind. The night watchmen are on their circuits. They have set routes and set times, and in some houses of this period, the route is enforced by a clock the man must wind or mark at each station, so that his employer can tell in the morning whether he walked the whole of it or sat down in the warm for 2 hours in the middle. They carry a lantern and they walk with a particular unhurried tread, and if you pass one on the ground floor at this hour, he will say good night, and that is very nearly the only exchange in the day where rank does not appear in the first 3 words. You go up. The service stair is stone, and it is narrow, and it turns often, and you have 1 candle, and the light goes ahead of you a few steps and stops. You know the number of turns. You know which step on the 3rd flight is worn hollow enough to catch a tired foot. On the 2nd landing, there is a window with no curtain, and if the sky has cleared, there is a rectangle of very slightly less black on the wall opposite, and if it has not, there is nothing at all. You climb past the floor where the family is, and past the floor where the upper servants have rooms with fireplaces in them, and you keep climbing, and the air gets colder as you rise, which is the opposite of what people expect of heat, but is exactly what happens in a house where warmth comes from grates, and every grate on your floor is empty. While you are climbing, consider the shape of your year, because it is not the shape most people now would imagine. You are in service, and being in service means the place absorbs almost the whole of your time. Your day began before 5, and it is now past 10, and inside that, there were perhaps 2 intervals in which nobody could reasonably ask anything of you. That is the day. The week is 6 of those, and then a Sunday that is not a day off, only a day with a different arrangement. in which you will attend a service and then very likely work through the afternoon, because the household eats on Sundays as it does on any other day. What you get instead is the half day. Perhaps one afternoon in a fortnight, perhaps one in a week if the housekeeper's department is well staffed and the court is quiet, and it starts after the midday work is done and ends when you are due back, which is early. If your family is in London, you might see them. If they are not, and for a great many girls in this house they are not, then the half day is a walk and a shop window and possibly a cup of something and back. Longer leave exists, but it is not a right. It is asked for and granted or not granted, and a week at home in a year is a good year. The court moves, which is its own strange substitute for travel, because when the household goes to Windsor, or further you go with it, and you see a different set of corridors, and clean a different set of grates, and sleep in a different cold attic, and that is not a holiday, but it is the only thing in your life that resembles going somewhere. Set against that, the place feeds you, houses you, gives you beer money, and a doctor of sorts if you are ill for a short time, and pays you quarterly, with almost nothing to spend it on, which is why a careful girl in this house can put away more in a year than a woman in a shop can put away in 3. That is the bargain. It is not a bad bargain by the standards available to you. It is simply a bargain that takes nearly all your waking hours in exchange for a wage and a bed. Your room is at the top. The door sticks in damp weather, and this is damp weather. The other maid is already in, and has left the candle end burning on the box between the beds, which is a small kindness, and is understood as one. You undress in the cold, quickly, in the order you always use, and you fold the black afternoon dress and set out the print dress for the morning across the end of the bed so that you can find it by touch at 5. The washstand water has a skin on it. You do not disturb it. Outside and a long way below, on the gravel, a carriage comes round and stops. There are voices, briefly, not words at all from up here, only the shape of them, then wheels again, going away, thinning out through the gates and into the road, and gone. The candle end gutters and takes itself out. The room is completely black. Somewhere under you, several hundred rooms are standing empty in the dark, with their covers on, waiting to be swept. Let us stay in that dark for a moment, because it is the right place from which to ask what the day was actually worth. Start with what is true and easily overlooked. You are good at this. Not adequate, not passable. Good. You can lay and light a fire in a cold grate in the dark and have it drawing properly in under 10 minutes without waking anyone and without leaving a mark on the hearthstone. You can carry a full can of water up a service stair in a long skirt at a pace that would have another woman spilling half of it, and you do it without thinking, the way a rider does not think about the reins. You know which of the staterooms takes damp first in a wet autumn, and you know it before the housekeeper does, because you are the one who touches the walls. You know that the third window on the north side needs the sash eased and lifted at the same moment, or it will shriek. And you know that the small door beside the gallery must be opened slowly, because the draught will lift a dust sheet and set it flapping across a room full of people who are meant to believe the room maintains itself. None of that is nothing. It is a body of practical knowledge built up over 3 years by attention, repetition, and a kind of continuous quiet problem-solving that nobody has ever named as such. In another trade, it would be called an apprenticeship, and at the end of it, a man would be given papers and a title and the right to charge for what he knew. You are given a print dress in the morning and a black dress at 3. There is also, and this is the part most easily lost, real satisfaction in it. Not the whole day, not most of it, but real, and worth saying plainly. A room that has been properly done has a particular look, and you can see it, and nobody else can. The gilt has no bloom of dust in the low light. The fire is set so that it will catch on the first application. The chairs stand at the angles they are meant to stand at, which are not quite the angles a person would leave them at. There is a quiet pleasure in walking out of a room like that and closing the door, and it is not the pleasure of servility. It is the pleasure of a job done to a standard you set for yourself, in a house where nobody will ever check the parts you care most about. Hold that. Now hold the other thing beside it, because both are true at once, and the whole meaning of the day sits in the space between them. The entire architecture of this house is designed so that your work leaves no trace of you. That is not an accident, and it is not a matter of manners. It is the actual design brief. The back stairs exist so that you can move without being seen. The service corridors exist so that coal and water and dishes and linen can travel the length of the building without ever crossing a room that a guest might enter. The rule about facing the wall exists so that a person of rank can walk from one end of the palace to the other and encounter no evidence that the building is maintained by anybody. The whole effect that visitors describe when they write home about the grandeur of it, the effortlessness, the sense that all this simply exists, is manufactured. It is manufactured by you, and by the woman in the next bed, and by several hundred others, and the specific thing you are manufacturing is the impression that nobody manufactures it. You are, in other words, extremely skilled at producing your own invisibility. That is the strangest part of the trade. The better you are at it, the less anybody upstairs has any reason to know you exist. And the arrangement holds only as long as your body holds. This is the thin part of the margin, and it is worth being clear about it, because the arrangement is a good one only while you are 24 and strong. There is no pension attaching to your place. There is no fund you have been paying into. If you are ill for a week or two, the household will generally carry you, because it is easier to carry a good maid for a fortnight than to train a new one, and because there is a house doctor of a sort, and there are rules about it. If you are ill for 6 months, that is a different question entirely, and the answer to it depends almost wholly on whether anyone above you thinks well of you and troubles to say so. If your eyes go, or your back stops taking the stairs, or your hands stop being reliable with a full tray, you cease to be useful to a household that needs the work done at speed, and there is no gentle track sideways into some lighter position. There are a small number of such positions. There are a very large number of women who would like one. Losing a place is not usually dramatic. Places are lost for ordinary reasons. A household is reduced. A department is reorganized, which happens more often here than anywhere. Somebody senior takes against you, or somebody senior is replaced by somebody who arrives with her own people. And a place lost without a character reference is very nearly a place that cannot be replaced, because the reference is the only capital you have. It is the whole of your credit in the world, and it is written by somebody else, and you never see it. This is why so many women in service leave by marriage, and why the decision looks so different from inside than it does from outside. It is not only romance, and it is not only escape. It is the recognition that a wage and a bed that depend entirely on your continuing strength are not a foundation you can stand on for 40 years, and that the alternative on offer, however uncertain, at least belongs to you. None of this is a complaint you would ever make. You would not put it in these words, and if somebody put it to you in these words, you would probably think it overstated, because the house is warm in the working parts, the food is good, the money is regular, and you know exactly what a mill town looks like. It is not a criticism of you that you accept the bargain. It is an observation about the shape of the bargain available. And now, the strange afterlife of all this. Within 80 years, this world will be remembered fondly and remembered wrong. It will be turned into something orderly and warm, a house full of characters who all know their place and are broadly content in it, with the below-stairs life supplying comedy and loyalty and the occasional tear. There will be a great deal of affection in that telling, and not very much accuracy in the timings. What corrects it is paper, dull paper mostly. The master of the household kept accounts, and the accounts survive. So do the wage books, and the coal contracts, and the candle returns, and the endless irritated memoranda about departments that will not cooperate with each other. So do the reports on the drains and the smoking chimneys, the ones written by people sent in to find out why the grandest house in the kingdom was so cold and smelled the way it did. So do the letters of the prince consort, who spent years trying to reorganize a household that had grown by accretion over a century and a half and had never once been designed. Those documents are unsentimental in a way that memoirs are not. A wage book does not romanticize. It states a figure against a name and a date, and from that figure, set beside the price of bread and the price of a room in London, a historian can work out with reasonable confidence what your year actually contained. A coal contract states tonnage, and from tonnage you can calculate grates and fires and, working backwards, hours of labor and the number of hands required to do it. This is how the invisible work becomes visible again, more than a century late, and not because anybody wrote it down out of interest in you. It becomes visible because somebody had to be accountable for money. That is the last irony of it, and it is a mild one. The system that took such care to hide you also, out of pure administrative habit, wrote down exactly how many of you there were, what you were paid, what you burned, what you ate, and what it all cost. It kept no record of your name in any way that mattered, and it kept a very good record of your existence. So the two things stand together, and neither cancels the other. The competence was real, the skill was real, and specific, and hard-won, and the satisfaction in a well-kept room was real and was yours. The structure was also real, and it did not credit any of it, and it was built so that nobody would have to. Upstairs, in the attic under the roof, none of this is on your mind. It is a little after 11. The cold has come fully into the room now, the way it always does, about an hour after the candle goes. The print dress lies folded across the end of the bed where you set it, sleeves in, so that your hand will find the collar first in the dark. Beside it, the apron. Beside that, the boots, turned so you can step into them without looking. The window has no curtain. There is a faint grey in it, not light exactly, only the difference between the glass and the wall. Somewhere far below, a door closes, and the sound arrives thinned out and softened by 4 floors of stone, more like weather than like a door. Then nothing. The house settles, the room is quiet, and the bed is warm at last, and the morning is 6 hours away and does not need thinking about yet.